Jonathan Merrick had a face built for wrenches and oil, a comfortable landscape of fine lines carved by 34 years under the hoods of rusting pickups and stubborn sedans. His hands, calloused and thick, carried the smell of grease and gasoline, a scent he no longer noticed. The small auto shop, tucked off the main highway, was his life, his legacy, and lately, his prison. He called it Merrick's Motors, a simple sign hanging crooked above the bay door, casting a long, lazy shadow across the cracked asphalt lot. The town itself, the one Jonathan had called home since he was a kid, lay like a dozing hound in the Montana sun. Its quiet hum deceived. On the surface, it was all sleepy storefronts and Friday night football, a place where folks left their doors unlocked. But underneath, a colder current ran. People had a way of disappearing here. Not often, not with a bang, but with a whisper, like smoke curling from a chimney on a windless morning. The sheriff's office, a ramshackle brick building downtown, always had a ready explanation. Runaway teens, disgruntled spouses, unfortunate hunting accidents in the vast, unforgiving wilderness that pressed in on all sides. Jonathan had heard the explanations so many times they had started to sound like a lullaby of lies. He knew better. He had seen the men who moved like shadows, smelled the heavy musk of illicit dealings clinging to their expensive leather jackets, even after a thorough airing. A few months back, Jonathan had been called to fix a busted fuel line on a fancy sport utility vehicle. A vehicle that stuck out like a sore thumb in a town built on beat-up Fords. While he had been under the chassis, he had overheard a conversation, sharp and low, about pelts and territory and a deal gone sour. He had seen enough, heard enough to know it was about illegal hunting, poaching rare game, and moving the goods through a network that stretched far beyond their sleepy valley. When the local prosecutor, a young woman fresh out of law school and full of idealistic fire, had put out a call for anyone with information, Jonathan, despite his gut telling him to keep his mouth shut, had gone down to the courthouse. He had told them what he knew. He had done his civic duty. And then the letters started. Anonymous, typewritten notes slipped under his shop door, tucked into his mailbox, sometimes even taped to the windshield of his own beat-up sedan. They started vague. Loose lips sink ships. Then they got specific, chillingly so. We know where your sister lives. Jonathan's sister, 30 miles away in the next county, had 2 little kids. He felt the cold knot of fear tightening in his stomach, a slow, inexorable squeeze. He went back to the sheriff, but Deputy Miller just shrugged, rubbed his grizzled chin. Hard to prove anything, Jonathan. It could be anyone. Jonathan realized with a sickening lurch that he was on his own. The law would not help him. The law could not. He sat on a stack of bald tires one Tuesday afternoon, staring at a half-drained cup of lukewarm coffee, the shadows lengthening across the shop floor as the sun dipped toward the western peaks. A grizzled man named Stan, a local hunter with eyes that held the weight of too much seen, ambled in. Stan had been a regular for years, his ancient hunting truck a constant source of income for Jonathan. He leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick, his gaze lingering on Jonathan's unusually tense posture. You look like you swallowed a bad bolt, Jonathan, Stan drawled, his voice like grinding gravel. Jonathan just grunted, not in the mood for small talk. Stan shifted, spit the toothpick into a nearby oil drum. Heard about those fellas you talked to the law about. They are not the type to forget a slight. His voice dropped, low and conspiratorial. There are ways, you know, ways to deal with problems the law cannot touch. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about, Stan? Stan glanced around the room, his movement secretive, then pulled a grimy business card from his wallet, its edges worn thin, and pressed it into Jonathan's palm. The paper felt strangely heavy. Rumors are not always just rumors, Jonathan. Sometimes they are just facts folks are too scared to say out loud. Stan gave him a long, knowing look, then turned and ambled out, leaving Jonathan with the card and a stomach full of lead. The address on the card led Jonathan to a dilapidated cabin 5 miles out of town, nestled deep in a stand of ancient pines, almost swallowed by the encroaching woods. It was a place that made the hairs on his arms stand up without any discernible cause. The air was still, heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. A faded "No Trespassing" sign hung askew on a leaning post. Jonathan swallowed hard, the taste of rust and fear in his mouth. He knocked. The sound vanished into the oppressive quiet. After a long moment, the door creaked open. Cain. He was tall, Jonathan observed, impossibly lean, a wire strung taut. His face was a landscape of sharp angles, high cheekbones, and a jawline that looked like it could crack granite. His eyes, the color of wet stone, unnervingly pierced Jonathan, revealing something he had not even known was within himself. Scars, thin and white, crisscrossed his left cheek, disappearing into the dark stubble of his beard. He wore a heavy, dark hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled low, and jeans that clung to him like a second skin. Jonathan felt a primal sensation of being watched, assessed, a deer caught in a hunter's scope. Cain did not speak. He just stood there. His presence radiated a palpable stillness. Jonathan, his throat suddenly dry, fumbled for words, stammering out his situation, the threats, the feeling of being hunted. Jonathan anticipated questions, demands for payment, even a nod of understanding. But Cain just listened, his stone-cold gaze unwavering. When Jonathan finally ran out of breath, a silence descended, thicker than the pine boughs outside. Then Cain spoke, his voice a low rasp, like dry leaves scuttling across pavement. How badly do you want to survive? Jonathan did not hesitate. More than anything. Cain nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his head. Agreed. No price, no contract, no handshake. Just that chilling monosyllabic agreement. Their arrangement began that day. Cain became a shadow, a silent, unnerving presence in Jonathan's life. He did not sleep at Jonathan's house, but he was always there, his presence manifesting consistently. When Jonathan left for the shop in the morning, Cain emerged from the darkness of the pines across the street, already waiting. At night, he vanished back into the trees, only to reappear the next day. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, his answers were clipped, economical, devoid of emotion. His eyes, those unsettling gray stones, remained permanently indifferent, yet Jonathan often caught them fixed on him, a predatory glint deep within their depths. The hooded sweatshirt was his uniform, even on warmer days, and the way his clothes molded to his unnaturally lean frame only heightened Jonathan's growing unease. He was never casual, never relaxed. He was a coiled spring, always. Jonathan felt an increasing dread. He had not hired a bodyguard. He had brought a predator into his world. A few days later, the first tangible threat arrived. Jonathan unlocked the heavy steel door of his shop. the familiar clatter echoing in the morning silence. A chill, sharper than the autumn air, greeted him inside. The air conditioner was not on. He knew. Someone had been there. He saw it immediately. His workbench, usually cluttered with tools and parts, had been carefully cleared. In its center, perched on a pristine sheet of butcher paper, was a taxidermy wolf's head, its glass eyes staring blankly. A deep, clean slice ran across its throat, spilling no blood, only stuffing. Beside it, a single sheet of paper, held down by a heavy wrench, bore crude block letters. "Next time, it will not be a dummy." Jonathan's breath hitched. He turned, his eyes darting around the dim shop. Cain stood in the bay door, a dark silhouette against the pale morning light. Jonathan expected a reaction, a flicker of anger, a tightening of the jaw. But Cain was utterly still, his face an unreadable mask. Only his eyes, in the fleeting light, gathered a deeper intensity, a cold, focused gleam that sent a fresh wave of ice through Jonathan's veins. Alone, utterly alone, save for this silent, watchful sentinel, Jonathan experienced the tendrils of terror tightening around him. He had placed his life in the hands of a stranger, a man who radiated a quiet, unnerving power. He deeply doubted Cain's ability to truly protect him from this creeping darkness. But the wolf's severed head, with its empty, accusing stare, was a stark reminder. There was no going back. The path ahead, whatever it held, had already been chosen, and it felt like a one-way street into the heart of something truly unspeakable. The days bled into each other, each one a little heavier, a little colder than the last, even as the late September sun still warmed the pavement. Jonathan's shop felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where a grim play was unfolding. Cain remained his constant, unsettling companion. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, always in Jonathan's periphery, a dark, hooded shape. He did not speak unless directly addressed, and even then his responses were guttural, often a single word. His eyes, perpetually shadowed by the hood, missed nothing. Jonathan tried to go about his routine, ordering parts, wrestling with stubborn engines, sweeping oil stains from the concrete floor. But every action felt observed, weighed, judged. Cain never used a phone. He had no car. He materialized out of the early morning mist and melted back into the evening shadows. Even in the town's small grocery store, where the fluorescent lights hummed and the muzak warbled, Cain was utterly alone. A dark, still point in a sea of bustling normalcy. His head slowly tracked across the aisles, his gaze sweeping over every face, every shadow, searching for something Jonathan could not perceive. This constant vigilance, this absolute detachment from the world around him, was unnerving. Jonathan started noticing other things, small at first, then larger, more disturbing. Cain never ate with him. He disappeared, only to return with the faint metallic scent of something raw clinging to him. Jonathan's own refrigerator, usually home to leftover pizza and a carton of milk, housed mysterious packages wrapped in butcher paper, thick red cuts of undeniably raw meat. Cain consumed them silently, without a single spice or seasoning, his jaw working with a savage intensity that made Jonathan's stomach clench. He never saw Cain drink water, coffee, or anything else. Just the meat. Then there was the mirror situation. Jonathan had a small shaving mirror in his bathroom, and a larger one in the hallway leading to his bedroom. After Cain started staying, not in the house, but certainly around it, Jonathan noticed they were gone. First the hallway mirror, then the bathroom one. He asked Cain about it once. "Hey, where did my mirrors go?" Cain just turned his head, his eyes momentarily unshadowed, glinting with an unreadable intensity. Unnecessary. And that was that. Jonathan recalled Stan's words about rumors. Cain was not just avoiding his own reflection. He actively hid from it. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the dropping evening temperatures. One evening, a little over a week after Cain's arrival, Jonathan was trying to read a paperback in his living room, the muted glow of the television providing the only light. Cain sat across from him, in the darkest corner of the room, utterly still. The air was thick, charged with unspoken tension. Then a sharp, splintering crack from outside, followed by the faint rustle of dry leaves. It was not the wind. Before Jonathan could even register the sound, Cain was gone. He did not stand, did not move. 1 second he was a dark mass in the corner. The next, the corner was empty. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the arms of his armchair, his knuckles white. The silence outside was absolute, punctuated only by the frantic thumping in his own chest. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity. Jonathan heard no shouts, no struggle, just the oppressive quiet. Then the back door creaked open. Cain reappeared, not alone. He was half dragging, half supporting 2 men. They were not the clean-cut thugs from the sport utility vehicle. These were local boys, known for petty crimes and hanging around the pool hall looking for trouble. One, a lanky kid named Dusty with a bad tattoo, had his arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his face ashen with terror. The other, a heavier man Jonathan knew only as Boots, was limping, one hand clamped over a gash on his thigh. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and disturbingly fresh blood. Cain dropped them unceremoniously on the kitchen floor. They whimpered, trying to scramble away, their eyes wide and unfocused. Jonathan stared at them, then at Cain. What happened?" Cain's voice was low, devoid of inflection. They fell. Jonathan looked closer. Dusty's wrist was clearly broken, and Boots had a deep, ragged scrape on his shin. But then he saw it. On Dusty's exposed forearm, 3 parallel lines of torn flesh, deep and bleeding freely, raked by something enormous. Similar marks marred Boots's neck, hidden partially by his shirt collar. These were not broken bones from a fall. They were marks. Claws, Jonathan realized, a cold terror spreading through him. Huge, powerful claws. Dusty and Boots, still trembling, babbled about something in the dark. A monster, before Cain silenced them with a look. He simply herded them out, pushing them towards the road. Jonathan watched them stumble away into the night, their terror a palpable thing. Jonathan could not sleep. He sat by the window, clutching a cold mug of coffee, watching the shifting shadows outside. Cain was out there, somewhere. And as the moon climbed higher, casting silver light across the landscape, Jonathan saw it. A faint, telltale glow from the darkness where Cain usually waited. Amber. A faint, unnatural, glowing amber. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, forcing himself to look. The glow remained. He stared, realizing it was not a trick of the light. He imagined Cain's eyes, the stone-cold gaze, now burning with that unholy internal light. The next day, Jonathan found himself scrutinizing Cain with a new, horrified intensity. He watched Cain's hands, those powerful, unnaturally lean hands. Beneath the grimy fingernails, Jonathan discerned something else. Not just dirt, but a length, a sharpness. The nails were longer than they should be, and tapered to a wicked point like tiny, curved blades. He rationalized it away as a trick of the light, poor hygiene, anything. But the image of those wounds on Dusty and boots, and the memory of that amber glow, was indelible. Jonathan no longer doubted that something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong with Cain. He just did not want to admit what his gut was screaming. Night fell again, thick and black. Jonathan was trying to fix a faulty carburetor on his old pickup, hoping the familiar rhythm of work would chase away the encroaching dread. Cain was nowhere in sight, which was, in its own way, even more unnerving. Jonathan heard a distant howl, not entirely animal. It sounded primal. He ignored it, blaming the wind. Then a sudden, blinding flash of orange light exploded from the back of his shop, followed immediately by a deafening crump. The ground shook. Jonathan instinctively ducked, his ears ringing. He scrambled to his feet, heart in his throat. Fire. One of his customers' cars, a battered sedan he had just finished an oil change on, was engulfed in furious orange flames, spitting black smoke into the night sky. The heat washed over him in a sickening wave. Figures, dark and indistinct, were scrambling away, their shadows dancing grotesquely in the inferno. Before Jonathan could even shout, before he could process the sheer violation, a blur of dark motion erupted from the shadows beside the garage. It was Cain. He launched himself, not running, not even leaping, but simply propelling himself, a dark projectile towards the fleeing figures. There was no shout, no warning, not a sound from him. Just a raw, animalistic savagery. Jonathan watched, frozen in horror, as Cain collided with the first figure. A guttural snarl, inhumanly deep, tore from Cain's throat. Jonathan heard a wet, tearing sound, then a scream that was cut abruptly short, a gurgle. Cain did not use a gun. He did not use a knife. He attacked with an utterly terrifying primal force. He was on the second figure, a dark blur of violence. Another scream, this one prolonged, horrific, twisting in the night air. Jonathan saw in the flickering, hellish light of the burning car something he would never unsee. Cain was tearing at them, literally ripping into flesh. He saw limbs flail, heard the sickening wet sounds of sinew and bone separating, the desperate dying gasps of men reduced to meat. As the inferno roared behind him, casting dancing devils on the walls, Jonathan saw Cain's face contort, shifting in the brutal light. The angle sharpened further, the jaw distended, teeth elongated into predatory points, and those eyes, now fully unveiled, burned with a furious, incandescent amber, like embers from a hellish forge. This was no man. This was a nightmare made flesh. The attack ended as abruptly as it began. The screams died. There was only the roar of the fire and the ragged sound of Jonathan's own breathing. Cain returned, stepping out of the shadows, bloodied, his dark clothes soaked in crimson. He stopped a few feet from Jonathan, the amber light still burning in his eyes, now with an eerie, profound calmness. He looked at Jonathan not with rage, not with triumph, but with an unsettling, utterly serene understanding. Jonathan stared back, his mind reeling. He had not just hired a bodyguard. He had hired a monster, and that monster had just shown him precisely what it was capable of. The world, Jonathan realized, was far, far larger and infinitely more terrifying than he had ever imagined. The sirens wailed, a banshee shriek slicing through the pre-dawn quiet, long after the last flames had sputtered and died. Jonathan stood numbly, wrapped in a blanket the first arriving deputy had thrust at him, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the smoke-stained wreckage of his customer's sedan. The smell of charred metal and burnt rubber hung heavy in the air, a sickening perfume of destruction. The police, a couple of young deputies, and the grizzled Sheriff Barlow picked through the debris, their flashlights carving swaths through the gloom. There were no bodies, of course, just scorched earth, a few scattered tools, and the indelible memory of what Jonathan had witnessed. Cain was gone. He had vanished into the woods just as the first distant siren began to keen. Sheriff Barlow, rubbing the back of his neck, turned to Jonathan. "This looks like a pretty bad accident, Jonathan." The fuel tank ruptured. A faulty wire ignited it. He paused, squinting at the faint, almost invisible drag marks in the dirt beyond the immediate blast radius. "We saw some tracks, evidence a couple of vagrants siphoned gas and got careless. Shame, really. Good thing you were not hurt." Jonathan just nodded, his throat tight, unable to articulate the truth. An accident, careless vagrants. The lie hung heavy in the cold morning air, accepted without question. The town preferred simple explanations, even when the evidence was flimsy as gossamer. But Jonathan knew. He knew the difference between an accident and a butchery. He knew the difference between human tracks and something that moved with primal, terrifying speed. The sheriff and his deputies simply had not looked hard enough, had not wanted to see what was truly lurking in their quiet valley. Later that morning, the sun climbing higher, Cain reappeared, stepping out of the dense pine line behind Jonathan's house, as if he had simply been waiting for the curtain to rise on a new act. Jonathan, his nerves frayed, his gut churning, did not hesitate this time. He grabbed Cain by the arm, surprised by the lean, corded strength he felt beneath the sleeve. "Who are you, really?" His voice was a raw whisper, barely audible. "What are you?" Cain's amber eyes, still holding that strange, calm intensity, met his. The hood was down, revealing the sharp angles of his face, the pale lines of old scars. He did not flinch, did not evade. "I'm a shapeshifter," he rasped, his voice low, dry as dust. "Not a wolf. Not like the stories. Something in between. Something older. Stronger." Jonathan felt a cold dread seep into his bones, even as a strange vindication settled in. He had not been crazy. The nightmares had been real. The men, the missing people. "Are you saying?" Cain nodded slowly. "The men you testified against? The ones who burned your car? They were pawns. Part of a larger game. The disappearances, those were the work of a pack. Not like me. Feral. Untamed. They see this valley as their hunting ground." "A pack," Jonathan whispered, feeling the reality of it clawing at his mind. "Like a pack of shapeshifters?" "Yes," Cain confirmed. "They have been here for generations, preying on the isolated farms, the travelers, the lost. They use the mafia, as you call them, as their unwitting enforcers, their eyes and ears. They threaten, they intimidate, they drive people into the woods, into their waiting jaws. The pack uses the fear, the secrecy, to operate. They take people for their own needs. Rituals, they call them, to feed their power, to keep their hold on this land. The townspeople know, on some level. They whisper about bad luck, about the woods being hungry. But they are too afraid to speak the truth, too afraid to fight back. The implication hit Jonathan with the force of a physical blow. His initial problem, the threats from a criminal group, was just the tip of a monstrous iceberg. Now, by hiring Cain, by witnessing his truth, he had drawn the attention of something far more ancient, far more predatory. He was no longer just a target of petty criminals. He was an enemy of a hidden savage power. His life, which he had thought was only in danger, was now well and truly forfeit. A sickening realization washed over him. He had stumbled into a war fought in the shadows between creatures of nightmare with human lives as the forgotten casualties. But even as the fear threatened to paralyze him, another emotion sparked. A fierce, desperate urge to survive, to fight back. And in that moment, as terrifying as Cain was, Jonathan knew he needed him. Without this silent, dangerous being, he was already dead. Cain, for his part, sensed this shift. He looked at Jonathan, not with disdain, but with a flicker of recognition. Jonathan did not know what Cain saw in him. A simple mechanic, a man whose hands were meant for grease, not gore. But it was enough. Their alliance, forged in blood and terror, was born of necessity. Cain, the monster, and Jonathan, the terrified human, became partners in a desperate, deadly game. The training began the very next day. Cain did not use a textbook or a range. He used the woods. He took Jonathan into the dense, shadowed wilderness that pressed in on their valley, the same woods that had swallowed so many others. Cain moved like a phantom, silent, swift, his senses preternaturally sharp. He taught Jonathan to move the same way, to feel the subtle shift of the wind, the crunch of a dry twig beneath a deer's hoof, the faint, earthy scent of something unseen. "Your senses are dull," Cain said, his voice a low rumble, as Jonathan stumbled over a root or missed the faint rustle of a squirrel. "You rely on sight. The world is more than what you see." He taught Jonathan to track. Not just footfalls, but the subtle depressions in the grass, the broken twigs, the way a branch might be brushed, indicating a passing form. He taught him how to read the forest, how to melt into its shadows, how to listen for the absence of sound, the unnatural stillness that often preceded danger. He taught him to shoot, not at targets, but at the imagined movement of a deer through dense foliage, the precise angle of a shot, the trajectory through branches. Jonathan had always been a decent shot, a hunter since boyhood, but Cain pushed him beyond technique, into instinct. He made him feel the rifle, become an extension of it. "Feel the air," Cain instructed one afternoon, his voice a whisper. "Smell the fear. They leave traces, not just physical, emotional." Jonathan closed his eyes, breathed deep, trying to distinguish the acrid scent of a distant skunk from the faint, sickly sweet odor Cain said was a shapeshifter's tell. He sat for hours listening to the symphony of the forest, trying to pick out the dissonant note, the sound that did not belong. Jonathan's body, already hardened by years of manual labor, was pushed to its limits. He learned to run through uneven terrain for miles without tiring, to climb trees with surprising agility, to endure the bite of the cold night air without complaint. His calloused hands grew tougher, his reflexes sharper. He started to notice things he had never seen before, felt things he had never perceived. A faint tingling on his skin when something was near, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that warned of danger. He also started to notice subtle changes within himself. His eyesight sharpened in low light. His hearing picked up distant conversations, faint rustles that had been lost to him before. He felt a simmering energy beneath his skin, a raw power he did not understand. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was becoming something else. He was becoming a hunter. And the realization, while terrifying, also brought with it a grim, resolute strength. The game had truly begun. The training with Cain was relentless, a baptism by cold river water and sharp pine needles. Jonathan, still a mechanic by day, felt himself slowly, irrevocably transforming by night. Cain, with his preternatural senses, was a brutal, silent tutor. He did not explain much, preferring to show, to push, to let Jonathan's raw instincts be honed by sheer necessity. "Smell," Cain grunted, leading Jonathan through the dense underbrush after a rainstorm. Not just pine, not just damp earth. The other. The taint. Jonathan closed his eyes, breathing deep, trying to filter through the myriad scents of the forest. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to discern it. A faint, coppery tang like stale blood mixed with something musky and strangely sweet. It was nauseating but distinct, the scent of them, the shapeshifters. Cain taught him to differentiate, to pick out human scents, familiar, predictable, from the wild, unpredictable scent of the pack. He learned to hear the whisper of a distant footfall on dry leaves, the subtle snap of a twig that was not caused by a deer. He learned to see in the gathering dusk, his eyes adjusting to the deepening shadows with an unnerving ease. The forest, once a comfort, then a place of terror, now became a canvas of heightened sensory experience. Every rustle, every scent, every shift in light holding a definite clue or a hidden danger. Their investigations were grim. Jonathan and Cain stumbled upon them with sickening regularity. New victims. The first was a young hiker, a college kid who had wandered too far off the trail. His body was found by a creek bed, twisted into a grotesque knot, his flesh torn and shredded by a giant, ravenous beast. The sheriff predictably blamed a rogue grizzly. Jonathan knew better. He saw the marks, the ragged, impossibly deep gashes that mirrored those on Dusty and Boots. He recognized the same coppery, musky scent clinging to the air. "They do this to remind the town," Cain rasped, his eyes scanning the tree line, not for danger but for purpose. "To show they are masters, to sow fear. It makes their hunting easier." They followed the faint trails, the subtle signs that only Cain could truly decipher. They moved deeper into the wilderness, pushing past where any sane person would venture. They found their lair. It was not a cave, but a network of old logging tunnels, long abandoned, deep within a forgotten ridge. The entrance was cleverly concealed, choked with thorny brambles and fallen trees, but the stench emanating from within was unmistakable. The rank, sickening smell Jonathan was learning to associate with the pack intensified 100-fold. Jonathan peered into the darkness, his flashlight beam trembling. He saw crude symbols daubed on the rock walls, primal, disturbing markings made with sickeningly dried blood. Animal bones, some disturbingly large, were scattered amidst human remains, picked clean and scattered like discarded scraps. This was not just a den. It was a charnel house. It was a place of ritual, of sacrifice. Cain had been right. They were not just killing. They were feasting, consuming not just flesh, but something intangible, something that fed their dark power. The air inside the tunnels was heavy, cloying, thick with a profound evil that made Jonathan's stomach churn. It was in these woods, on the fringes of the pack's territory, that they found Emily. She was small, younger than Jonathan had expected, with eyes that held a haunted, ancient wisdom. Her clothes were torn, her skin scratched and bruised, but there was a fierce, defiant spark in her gaze. She was a shapeshifter, like Cain. but had been an unwilling part of the pack, trapped, abused. She had barely escaped, carrying fresh scars as testament to her ordeal. She was terrified but resolute. "Their lead shapeshifter," she rasped, her voice thin but steady. "He is stronger than any you have met. He believes he's destined to rule, not just the woods but the town. He wants to bring the humans under his heel, to make them fear him, worship him." She looked at Cain, then at Jonathan, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "He gathers power, more than any lead shapeshifter I've known. He wants the town." Emily shared their stories, their weaknesses, their habits. She spoke of the lead shapeshifter's brutal strength, his cunning, his absolute control over the lesser members of the pack. She told them about the ancient rituals, the blood sacrifices, the way the pack drew strength from the fear of the humans they devoured. Her words painted a terrifying picture, but also offered a glimmer of understanding, a path to strike back. With Emily's insights, a plan began to form. It was audacious, reckless, bordering on suicidal. They would hit the pack where it hurt, in their territory, then lure them into a trap. Jonathan's workshop, with its heavy steel doors, its concrete floor, its tools repurposed as weapons, was a fitting, if desperate, choice for the final confrontation. They had to move fast. Emily warned that the lead shapeshifter was growing bolder, his patience wearing thin. Soon, he would unleash the full force of his pack on the town, no longer content with picking off stragglers. As they drew closer to the pack's territory, Jonathan noticed more than just his enhanced senses. He felt a deeper, more profound change stirring within him. Sometimes when his adrenaline spiked, or when he focused intensely, he felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, a warmth that bloomed outward. He caught glimpses of his reflection in puddles, in the dark glass of his shop windows, and saw it, a faint, undeniable amber light deep within his pupils. It was like a reflection of Cain's gaze, but it was his own. His strength grew, not just from the rigorous training, but from something internal, something awakening. His muscles felt tighter, his movements more fluid. He was faster, stronger, sharper than he had ever been. It was terrifying, exhilarating. Cain and Emily, exchanging knowing glances, confirmed his unspoken fears and hopes. "The more you confront them," Cain explained, his voice softer than usual, almost a rumble of understanding, "the more you face what they are, the more you become like them. You killed one of their kind. The blood speaks to you now. It calls you." Emily nodded, her eyes sad. "The lead shapeshifter feels it too. He knows you are changing. He will see you as a challenge, a threat. You are becoming a weapon against them." The idea was to provoke the pack, to draw them out. Emily, with her intimate knowledge of their patterns, suggested a series of targeted strikes against their hunting parties, disrupting their food source, creating enough irritation to draw the lead shapeshifter's wrath. Jonathan, Cain, and Emily worked together, a strange trio, the silent hunter, the new changeling, and the escaped captive. Their goal was singular: eliminate the lead shapeshifter, scatter the pack, and break their hold on the valley. The stakes were life or death, not just for them, but for every soul in the unsuspecting town. The workshop soon became a battlefield. The workshop felt different now, no longer a place of grease and honest labor, but a fortified bunker. Jonathan had welded the windows shut with sheets of thick steel, turning the clear glass into blind, unyielding eyes. The main bay door, usually a gaping maw, was secured with heavy-duty locks and reinforced with stacked engine blocks and transmissions, creating a formidable barricade. Tools lay scattered, but not in disarray. They were weapons now. Pipe wrenches, tire irons, sturdy crowbars, all placed within easy reach. A pump-action shotgun loaded with buckshot lay across the main workbench, its cold steel a comfort and a terror in Jonathan's hands. The air was heavy, electric with anticipation, the acrid smell of ozone mixing with the familiar scent of oil and steel. Night had fallen hard, thick and black, swallowing the last sliver of twilight. Jonathan sat on an overturned 5-gallon bucket, the shotgun across his knees, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Cain stood near the main door, a dark statue, his hooded profile unnervingly still. Emily, pale but resolute, crouched behind a stack of spare tires near the back entrance, a hunting knife gripped tight in her trembling hand. They had created a funnel, a killing zone. Then they heard it, a low, guttural growl, not from one but from many throats, echoing from the woods beyond the shop. It was a sound that clawed at the very fabric of the night, a sound of primal hunger and ancient rage. Closer now, the distinct thud of heavy paws on damp earth, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs. More howls, louder, closer, blending into a terrifying chorus of savagery. The pack was here. Jonathan swallowed, tasting dust and fear. He squeezed the shotgun, the smooth stock a familiar weight in his hands, yet utterly alien in this context. Then the first impact hit the main door, a sickening thump that rattled the entire building. The reinforced steel groaned. A guttural roar, filled with frustrated fury, erupted from outside. The battle had begun. The night exploded into a maelstrom of chaos. More impacts, heavy and relentless, hammered against the metal. Jonathan heard the terrifying sound of claws raking against steel, the low growls of beasts enraged. Outside, the world erupted in a cacophony of snarls and furious thumps. They were trying to claw their way in, to tear the building apart with their raw strength. Suddenly, a section of the back wall, weaker where it joined an old extension, groaned and splintered. Emily let out a sharp cry. A dark shape, hulking and furious, tore through the breach, followed by another, then another. They were larger than any wolf Jonathan had ever seen, rippling with muscle, their eyes burning with a malevolent green fire. Not fully wolves, not fully men, they were twisted, horrific hybrids. Cain moved. He did not run, he flowed, a dark, unstoppable force. He met the first shapeshifter head-on, a blur of silent violence. Jonathan saw him lunge, heard a sickening crunch, then a yelp of pain as Cain's arm, encased in rippling muscle, tore at the creature's throat. The shapeshifter fell, thrashing before Cain moved on to the next. He fought like a creature possessed, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a pure, unadulterated beast. He moved with a speed and ferocity that made Jonathan's blood run cold, even as it filled him with a desperate, primal hope. Emily, despite her fear, was a whirlwind of motion, her small hunting knife flashing in the dim light. She dodged, weaved, and struck with surprising agility, targeting weak points Cain had shown her, hamstringing and disabling the lesser pack members that swarmed through the breach. Jonathan, for a moment, was paralyzed. The sheer, overwhelming savagery of it all. The guttural snarls, the tearing flesh, the stench of blood and fear filling the confined space. He saw Cain, grappling with two of the beasts, his dark form momentarily silhouetted against the flames that were now licking up from a wrecked car in the lot outside, ignited by some unseen fury. Then, a shapeshifter, massive and snarling, lunged directly at Emily. Jonathan's fear broke. A surge of pure, desperate adrenaline coursed through him, hot and electrifying. He heard Cain's growl, but Cain was caught, locked in a brutal struggle. Emily screamed. Jonathan swung the shotgun up, the cold metal leaping into his shoulder. He aimed not with precision, but with a desperate, primal instinct, and pulled the trigger. The blast roared, deafening in the enclosed space, a concussion of smoke and fire. The shapeshifter attacking Emily stumbled, a huge hole torn in its side, yelping in pain before collapsing. Jonathan did not stop. He fired again, a guttural yell tearing from his own throat, surprising him with its savagery. Another blast, another shapeshifter dropped, thrashing. He felt a profound shift within him, something elemental awakening. His senses sharpened to an impossible degree. The smell of the pack, the roar of the fire, the taste of fear in his mouth, all coalesced into a single, terrifying clarity. He felt a surge of power, a raw strength blossoming in his limbs. His eyes, he knew, were burning with that same amber glow. He was no longer just a man with a gun. He was a part of the hunt now, a part of their world. The battle raged. Jonathan, now moving with a grim, desperate purpose, continued to fire, reloading with frantic speed, each shot echoing like a thunderclap. He saw Cain, battered and bleeding, his movements slower but still fighting with a terrifying resolve. He had taken down several of the lesser shapeshifters, but the lead shapeshifter was still out there. Then the main bay door, weakened by the relentless assaults, finally gave way with a splintering crash, and in walked the lead shapeshifter. It was immense, a creature of nightmare made real. Taller than Cain, broader, its fur a matted dark gray, its eyes glowing with an ancient malevolent intelligence. It moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, surveying the carnage, its gaze settling on Cain. This was the source of the evil, the apex predator that had terrorized the valley for generations. Cain, seeing the lead shapeshifter, let out a deep, challenging growl, a sound of defiance and primal fury. He launched himself forward, ignoring his wounds, meeting the lead shapeshifter's charge with a sickening crash. They locked together, a maelstrom of claws, teeth, and raw, unrestrained power. The lead shapeshifter was a brutal, overwhelming force. Cain fought with every ounce of his being, but Jonathan could see the strain, the pain etched on his transforming features. Cain was bleeding heavily, a deep gash on his shoulder, his movements becoming sluggish. He would not last, not alone. Jonathan knew with a certainty that transcended fear that this was it, the final moment. He looked at Cain, locked in a death grip with the monstrous lead shapeshifter, and a cold, terrible resolve settled over him. This was not about survival anymore. This was about vengeance. This was about Cain. He raised the shotgun, his hand steady, the amber light in his eyes burning like twin suns. The lead shapeshifter, its head momentarily exposed as it wrestled Cain, turned its glowing green eyes towards Jonathan, a flicker of surprised rage crossing its features. Jonathan did not hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The blast ripped through the air, a final, deafening roar. The buckshot tore into the lead shapeshifter's head, blowing apart bone and sinew. The monster staggered, its roar turning into a choked gurgle, its eyes losing their malevolent glow. It fell, a massive, broken heap of fur and muscle, shaking the very foundations of the shop. Cain, battered and bleeding but still standing, moved with a flash of speed, snapping the lead shapeshifter's neck with a brutal final twist. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the distant fire and Jonathan's ragged breathing. Outside, the last of the Mafia figures, those who had aided the pack, scattered into the darkness, their courage shattered by the night's horrific violence. The pack was destroyed. The lead shapeshifter was dead. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, filtered through the smoke-filled air, painting the carnage in shades of gray and bruised purple. The town, oblivious to the battle that had raged in its shadows, awoke to a new day. But for Jonathan, nothing was the same. The world had irrevocably changed. And so had he. The pale, bruised light of dawn filtered through the smoke-grimed windows of the workshop, illuminating the wreckage. The air, thick with the stench of blood, burnt oil, and fear, tasted like ash in Jonathan's mouth. He lay on a makeshift cot, every muscle aching, every bone protesting, his head throbbing with a dull, persistent pain. His hands, still stained with powder residue and something darker, trembled slightly. He opened his eyes slowly. Cain sat nearby, a dark silhouette against the still smoldering remains of a shattered engine block. He had cleaned himself up, mostly. The blood on his clothes was gone, and his face, though still bearing the faint lines of exertion, was calm. His eyes, when they met Jonathan's, held that familiar, unsettling amber glow. But today there was a profound weariness in their depths. Jonathan pushed himself up, wincing as his muscles protested. He felt utterly exhausted, drained to his very core, but beneath the fatigue, a strange, crackling energy still pulsed through his veins. He felt stronger, more aware. His senses were still heightened, every faint creak of the cooling metal, every distant bird call, every subtle shift in the wind, piercingly clear. "It's over," Jonathan rasped, the words feeling foreign and inadequate. Cain nodded, his voice a low rumble. "For now." He rose, moving with a silent grace that belied the brutal fight he had endured. He came to stand over Jonathan, his amber gaze fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. "You killed the lead shapeshifter, Jonathan. You took its life, its power." Jonathan felt a cold dread seep into his stomach. "What does that mean?" "It means you are bound to this world now," Cain stated, his voice devoid of judgment, simply stating a profound, irreversible truth. "The lead shapeshifter's blood, your own transformation. You are no longer entirely human. You are one of us." Jonathan stared at his hands, then at Cain. The amber glow in his own eyes, which he had only seen in fleeting reflections, now felt like a permanent, undeniable part of him. The strength, the heightened senses, the raw energy thrumming beneath his skin. It was not just adrenaline. It was real. He had become what he fought. He had become a monster. The realization was both terrifying and, in a strange, twisted way, a perverse kind of homecoming. He was an outsider now, forever set apart. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the drip of condensation from a leaking pipe. Cain spoke again, his voice carrying a new, almost paternal weight. "This town will not understand. It will fear what you are. Alone you will not survive here. Not truly." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, weighty and undeniable. "Stay with me, Jonathan. There is a path for those like us. A purpose." Jonathan looked out the shattered bay door, at the pale morning light painting the distant, familiar peaks. His workshop, his life, his normalcy, lay in ruins. He thought of the terrified faces of the deputies, the easy dismissal of the truth. He thought of the fear, the ignorance, the rigid boundaries of their human world. There was no place for him there anymore, not truly, not the man he had become. The words Cain spoke were not a plea, but a simple, brutal truth. He was alone in this new reality, except for Cain. He closed his eyes, a profound weariness washing over him. He was a mechanic whose hands had learned to kill, a victim who had become a hunter. His life, a comfortable, predictable routine, had been irrevocably shattered, reshaped into something dark and dangerous. But in the shattered pieces, he saw a strange kind of liberation. He had faced the abyss, and he had looked back. He had survived. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze met Cain's. The amber in his own eyes felt stronger, more settled. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was tempered by a grim acceptance, a nascent sense of belonging in a world he never knew existed. "Yes," Jonathan said, the word coming out steady, resolute. "Yes, I will." He stood up, testing his aching limbs. He looked at Cain, the man who had brought him into this terrifying new existence, the monster who had saved his life. And in Cain's silent, unblinking gaze, Jonathan saw not just a predator, but a grim, loyal companion. Later that afternoon, after the police had officially closed their investigation into the fire and vandalism, Jonathan walked through the remnants of his life. He looked at the scarred workbench, the crumpled metal, the lingering shadows of violence. He felt no grief for what was lost, only a hollow awareness of what was gained. He went into the small, grimy bathroom attached to the office, a place he had used countless times without a second thought. He found the small, cracked mirror still hanging above the sink, overlooked in Cain's purge of reflective surfaces. He stared at his reflection. His face, usually open and honest, now held a new intensity, a hardened edge. His hair was disheveled, streaked with dirt and ash, but it was his eyes that held him captive. Deep within their familiar blue depths, a faint, undeniable amber glow pulsed, like embers banked in a dying fire, waiting to ignite. It was a silent testament to the night's horrors, to the profound, irreversible change that had taken root within him. Jonathan Merrick, the mechanic, was gone. In his place stood something else. Something dangerous. Something new. The reflection stared back at him, a silent, amber-eyed promise. He was one of them now, and there was no turning back. The old life, the one where Jonathan Merrick's biggest worry was a clogged fuel injector or a seized brake caliper, slowly receded into the past like a forgotten dream. The workshop, once a place of mundane routine, had become their sanctuary, scarred but standing. The town, with its murmuring fears and willful ignorance, continued its predictable rhythm, blissfully unaware of the silent guardians walking among them. Jonathan's new life was a brutal education. Cain became his shadow, his sensei, his relentless guide into the depths of his own transforming nature. Every day brought new lessons. Jonathan learned to control the amber glow in his eyes, to tamp down the primal instincts that now simmered just beneath his skin, threatening to boil over. He learned to shift his senses at will, to hear the distant rustle of a squirrel, then to focus, to discern the faint specific scent of an intruder miles away. He practiced moving with Cain's fluid, silent grace, becoming less clumsy, more efficient. his body adapting to its newfound strength and speed. His once purely human muscles now stretched, tightened, and rippled with an unnatural resilience. "Control," Cain emphasized, his voice a low growl as Jonathan struggled to rein in the surge of power that threatened to overwhelm him. "The beast is strong, but the mind is stronger. You must learn to wield it, not be wielded by it." Their first task, once Jonathan had gained some measure of control, was vengeance. The remnants of the Mafia, those who had allied with the Pack, those who had threatened Jonathan's sister and burned his property, had scattered like cockroaches after the lead shapeshifter's demise. But they had not vanished entirely. Cain, with Emily's help, had tracked them. They became hunters of hunters, moving under the cloak of night. Jonathan, armed with his shotgun, and now, increasingly, his own innate power, followed Cain through the tangled wilderness, through abandoned cabins and decrepit farmhouses. He learned to track the faint scent of fear, the almost imperceptible disturbance in the air that spoke of human prey. The work was brutal, necessary. They did not kill indiscriminately, but they disarmed, they intimidated, they left their mark, a chilling message delivered in the shadows. One by one, the last vestiges of the criminal network that had plagued the valley were dismantled, their operations shattered, their members vanished or fled for good. Whispered stories of the quiet man and his partner haunting their desperate flight. Jonathan felt no remorse, only a cold, grim satisfaction. Justice in this new world was not dispensed by the sheriff. Slowly, in the wreckage of their old lives, a new kind of family began to form. Emily, fragile but fierce, found her place with them. She helped Jonathan understand his changes, shared her own experiences of living between worlds. Jonathan and Cain, once an employer and a terrifying hired hand, grew into something deeper. There was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged in fire and blood. They were two sides of the same coin, both touched by the supernatural, both outsiders, forever changed. Cain, who had always been a solitary figure, softened, subtly, almost imperceptibly, in Jonathan's presence, his loyalty fierce and unwavering. They were kin, not by blood, but by destiny. Yet, they knew their story was far from over. The world, Jonathan now understood, was a much larger, more dangerous place than he had ever conceived. Shapeshifters existed, and other creatures lurked in the hidden corners, the shadowed valleys. Other powers, other threats, lay coiled and waiting. The victory over the Pack was just one battle in an endless war. New dangers always emerged. Jonathan, who had started as a terrified victim, a simple mechanic clinging to his small life, had indeed become a hunter. He had embraced his fate, learned to navigate this treacherous new world. The fear never entirely left him, but it was now a tool, a sharpened edge, not a paralyzing force. He understood his place, his purpose. He protected this valley, this quiet town that refused to see the truth. Years passed. The workshop, slowly rebuilt, became a beacon, a subtle warning. Stories circulated, hushed and disbelieving, about the strange mechanic with the unnerving gaze, and his silent, powerful partner. Tales of bad things happening to bad people who dared to prey on the innocent. Of shadows that moved too fast in the moonlit woods. Of eyes that burned like embers in the dark. Jonathan and Cain became legends, figures of myth, their presence a silent, chilling deterrent to any who threatened the fragile peace. Sometimes a young man or woman, driven by a similar unease, A flicker of something wild in their own eyes sought them out, just like Jonathan had once sought out Stan. One blustery autumn evening, many years later, the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves heavy in the air, Jonathan sat on an old oil drum, his hair now streaked with gray, his face lined with the wisdom of battles fought and horrors witnessed. Cain, his own face untouched by time, sat opposite him, sharpening a wicked-looking hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. A young man, barely out of his teens, sat between them, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He had heard the whispers, felt the stirrings within himself, and sought them out, just as Jonathan had once sought out Cain. "You know," he began, his voice gravelly with age and experience, "this whole thing started with a busted fuel line on a fancy sport utility vehicle." He paused, a faraway look in his amber-flecked eyes, and a guy who just wanted to survive. He began to tell their story, the full, unvarnished truth, the boy listening, captivated, as the flickering fluorescent light cast long, dancing shadows across the rebuilt workshop. The legends, Jonathan knew, began somewhere, and their legend, forged in the heart of darkness, continued. They remained in the valley, two silent guardians, forever bound to its shadows and its secrets. Years had passed since the night the lead shapeshifter fell. The town, rebuilt and ostensibly safer, had settled back into its rhythms. Jonathan's workshop, fully restored, hummed with the familiar sound of engines, a comforting lie of normalcy. He and Cain had become fixtures, part of the landscape, their silent vigilance a hidden undercurrent to the town's peace. They had become adept at blending in, at keeping their true natures veiled. But the quiet hum began to falter. A new disquiet settled in, like a chill that no fire could fully banish. It started subtly, with whispers. A traveling salesman, his car found abandoned on a lonely back road, his luggage still neatly packed in the trunk. A young couple, out for a hike, never returned, their car left in the trailhead parking lot. Not the brutal public displays of the old pack, but quiet disappearances, almost surgical in their execution. The sheriff, now a younger, less jaded man, still offered the familiar platitudes, runaways, unfortunate accidents, but even his voice held a faint tremor of unease. Jonathan and Cain felt it, an almost psychic thrum of wrongness in the air. Jonathan, his senses now finely tuned, picked up the scent of fear again, but it was different. Not the feral musk of the shapeshifters, but something cleaner, sharper, like ozone and something metallic. They began their own investigation, moving through the shadowed woods and the quiet back roads, their silent partnership a well-oiled machine. They found the traces, faint but undeniable. Footprints that were too neat, too purposeful, utterly human, yet possessed of a strange, unnerving precision. They found spent shell casings, not from hunting rifles, but from specialized heavy weaponry Jonathan did not recognize. They found small, intricate devices hidden near the sites of disappearances, miniature sensors, motion detectors. This was not the work of feral beasts. This was the methodical, calculated work of highly organized hunters. "There is another group," Jonathan said one evening, after they had spent hours tracking a barely perceptible trail. Not the mafia, not shapeshifters, humans. Cain's amber eyes, usually so impassive, held a cold, knowing light. They have always been here, watching, waiting. The realization was a punch to the gut. All this time, they had been so focused on the shapeshifters, they had not considered the other predators. A group of humans, armed and skilled, dedicated to hunting supernatural creatures. The thought was chilling. It meant that their world, the delicate balance they had helped forge, was now under threat from a different kind of enemy. Their first encounter was almost accidental. They were tracking a fresh disappearance, a local recluse who had vanished from his cabin, when they stumbled upon a hidden encampment deep in the remote hills. It was a well-organized operation, camouflaged tents, sophisticated electronic gear, and a dozen or so men and women moving with military precision. They wore tactical gear, carried specialized weapons, and moved with a cold, focused intent. Jonathan and Cain observed them from a distance, hidden in the dense undergrowth. Jonathan recognized one of them immediately, his stomach clenching. Stan. Old Stan, the grizzled hunter who had given him Cain's address all those years ago. The same Stan who had hinted about specialized help. Stan, looking older, but moving with a coiled energy Jonathan had never seen in him before, giving orders, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. A dangerous alliance. It felt wrong, a betrayal of their own kind, but a necessary one. Jonathan and Cain moved into the camp, dropping their hidden weapons to show their intent. Stan, his face a mask of surprise and then cold calculation, raised a hand, stopping his armed team from firing. "Jonathan Merrick," Stan drawled, a thin smile playing on his lips, and the beast. "I knew you would stir things up." He introduced them to his team, a grim, dedicated group of individuals, all bearing their own scars, their own reasons for hunting the supernatural. He explained their purpose: to protect humanity from the creatures that preyed on them, to restore order, to eradicate all threats. He spoke of the shapeshifters, the vampires, the other things that lurked in the dark. He acknowledged Cain's unique nature, even respected it, in his own twisted way. "We hunt the bad ones," Stan said, his eyes meeting Cain's. "The ones who feed on humans, the ones who cannot control their urges." He made it sound logical, righteous. And for a desperate moment, Jonathan almost believed him. This new group, the Hunters, as they called themselves, offered a different purpose, a way to use their unique abilities for a perceived greater good. Jonathan and Cain, with their experience and their strength, were formidable assets. They worked together for a few weeks, tracking new disappearances, finding the true culprits, rogue shapeshifters, not from the old pack, but isolated feral individuals who had taken advantage of the power vacuum. Jonathan felt a flicker of hope. This was the balance. Creatures like him protecting the human world, guided by hunters who understood the darkness. But Jonathan's unease grew. He noticed the way Stan looked at Cain, a calculating gleam in his eyes, the way Stan's orders subtly shifted, always pushing them to eliminate, never to contain. Jonathan started overhearing conversations, fragments of whispers about the ultimate solution, about cleansing the valley. The truth, when it came, was a cold knife in Jonathan's back. Stan, during a joint patrol in the deep woods, slowed his pace, walking beside Jonathan. "You have done well, Jonathan," he said, his voice quiet, almost mournful. "Both of you. Your kind, when controlled, is a powerful weapon." He paused, a strange, sickening smile spreading across his face. But a weapon is still a weapon, and weapons must be contained, or broken. Before Jonathan could react, a dart, silent and swift, shot from the shadows and buried itself in Cain's neck. Cain roared, stumbling, his body convulsing, the potent tranquilizer already taking effect. His eyes, fixed on Stan, burned with a furious, betrayed amber. Jonathan spun, his own eyes blazing, feeling the familiar surge of power. "Stan, what have you done?" Stan just sighed, a weary, almost regretful sound. "I put you on a leash, Jonathan. A very powerful leash. And now, I am going to use it to clean up this valley once and for all. All shapeshifters. Every last one. Your friend, and you too, when your usefulness has run its course." His men, emerging from the trees, leveled their specialized weapons, not at Cain, but at Jonathan. Traps, hidden nets, and strange glowing devices suddenly sprung into view, encircling them both. The betrayal was complete, sickening in its precision. Stan, the man who had pointed Jonathan towards his salvation, had been orchestrating his destruction all along. The old hunter, the quiet man, was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator more cunning and insidious than any shapeshifter. Jonathan watched in helpless horror as Cain, weakened by the dart, fought valiantly but slowly succumbed, falling to his knees, his muscles seizing. Stan's men moved in, securing him with heavy silver-lined chains. "Do not worry, Jonathan," Stan said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of friendship, cold and hard as flint. "We will make sure your end is quick, efficient. You served your purpose." Jonathan felt a roar build in his chest, a purely animalistic sound as he lunged at Stan, his eyes burning with fury and desperation. He was met by a hail of blows, a sudden, overwhelming force of trained hunters. The air was filled with shouts, the clang of metal, the snap of stun rods. The fight was on, but it was a fight they were destined to lose. Stan had planned this, meticulously, patiently. He was the real monster, driven not by hunger but by a colder, more dangerous fanaticism. The battle was short, brutal, and ultimately catastrophic. Jonathan, fueled by a raw, primal rage, fought with a ferocity that stunned Stan's men, transforming fully, his skin stretching, his muscles bulging, the amber in his eyes a burning inferno. He tore through their ranks, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, breaking bones and shattering weapons. But Stan had planned meticulously. The hunters were prepared, armed with advanced technology and specialized tranquilizers designed to subdue shapeshifters. They cornered him, overwhelmed him with numbers, and eventually brought him down with a volley of dart guns. He collapsed, his body convulsing, the potent chemicals racing through his system. He woke hours later, groggy and disoriented, his body aching from the tranquilizers and the brutal fight. He was in a cage, a reinforced steel box, deep within Stan's hidden encampment. Cain was in a similar cage beside him, his massive form still groggy, but his eyes, when they met Jonathan's, burning with a silent, furious accusation. Stan stood before them, his face unreadable. "A pity," he said, his voice flat. "Such potential. But you're too dangerous, Jonathan. Both of you. You are part of the problem." He talked about cleansing, about purity, about eradicating all supernatural threats from the valley. He planned to use Cain as bait, to draw out any remaining shapeshifters, and then to kill them all. Jonathan, once the hunter, was now the hunted, trapped, helpless. But Stan's victory was short-lived. Emily, who had escaped the initial ambush, reappeared, a small, fierce phantom in the night. She attacked the camp while most of Stan's men were out on a hunting mission. It was a whirlwind of desperate, brutal violence. She was quick, cunning, using her shapeshifter abilities to deadly effect. disabling the few guards and the perimeter defenses. She freed Jonathan and Cain, but not before an alarm was triggered, not before the camp was alerted. They escaped, but not unscathed. Stan's men returned quickly, engaging them in a desperate running battle through the forest. Jonathan, Cain, and Emily fought as a unit, a desperate feral trio against the organized precision of Stan's hunters. They caused enough damage, inflicted enough losses, to buy themselves time, to make their escape. But the cost was immense. When they finally broke free, emerging from the woods miles from the ravaged camp, the first thing they saw was the distant glow against the night sky. Smoke. Jonathan's workshop, his home, the sanctuary he had painstakingly rebuilt, was engulfed in an inferno. Stan, in a fit of vengeful rage and as a clear message, had burned it to the ground. Jonathan watched the flames consume his past, a cold, hollow ache settling in his chest. His reputation, once a quiet legend, was now shattered. Stan and his men spread their version of the story, of dangerous monsters, of betrayal, of a town finally free of supernatural influence. The town believed them. Jonathan and Cain were now outcasts, pariahs, truly alone. They had lost everything they had fought for. Their paradise, however fragile, was gone. "We cannot stay," Emily said, her voice raw, watching the distant blaze. "They will hunt us, everywhere." Jonathan nodded, a grim resolve settling over him. He felt the pain of loss, but also a fierce, desperate urge to survive. To keep Cain safe. To keep Emily safe. There was no going back. Their path lay forward into the unknown. They became exiles, nomads in their own country. The journey was long, arduous, fraught with danger. They traversed endless miles, moving mostly at night, sleeping in abandoned barns, forgotten shacks, and the cold comfort of the wilderness. They skirted towns, always wary, always looking over their shoulders. Jonathan learned to steal what they needed, to live off the land, to survive on instinct and cunning. He felt the bitterness of their fate, the unfairness of it all, but beneath it, a deepening bond with Cain and Emily. They were a pack now, a small, fierce family of outsiders, bound by shared trauma and mutual trust. The loneliness was a heavy cloak. They were in a world that reviled them, a world that hunted them. They belonged nowhere. Jonathan often found himself staring at the distant lights of a town, imagining the lives within, the comfortable ignorance, the everyday routines he had once taken for granted. He missed the smell of engine oil, the simple satisfaction of fixing a broken machine. But those lives were no longer his. It was Emily who suggested their new path. "There are others," she whispered one night, as they huddled around a meager fire deep in the Montana mountains. "Not all shapeshifters are like the old pack. Not all are feral. There are places, communities, where we live in harmony with the humans who accept us, where we teach control, where we protect rather than prey." She spoke of a hidden valley far to the west, beyond the jagged peaks and the vast plains, a place whispered about in ancient shapeshifter lore, a sanctuary for their kind. Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Jonathan's chest. A new home, a new family, a place where they truly belonged. The journey was perilous, crossing treacherous mountains and barren plains, always shadowed by the threat of Stan's relentless hunters. They fought skirmishes, evaded traps, and pushed themselves to their absolute limits. Finally, after weeks of relentless travel, they found it. Tucked away in a forgotten valley, hidden from the prying eyes of the outside world, lay a small, thriving community. a blend of human and shapeshifter living side by side, cultivating the land, sharing their lives. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was a place of acceptance, of understanding. Jonathan watched, his heart swelling, as children, some human, some with the unmistakable flicker of amber in their eyes, played together in the golden light of the setting sun. He saw shapeshifters working alongside humans in the fields, their strength harnessed for common good. He saw understanding, not fear. He looked at Cain, standing silently beside him, his expression for once unreadable, yet radiating a profound sense of peace. He looked at Emily, her face transformed by relief and a nascent joy. They were no longer alone. They had found their place, their new home, a new family, a new life. The bitterness of their exile began to recede, replaced by the quiet promise of belonging. The long, hard journey had finally brought them home. Years unfurled, marked not by calendars but by the turning of seasons in the hidden valley that had become their sanctuary. Jonathan and Cain, with Emily, settled into the rhythm of this new life, a delicate balance between their shapeshifter instincts and the human community that accepted them. Jonathan, now a respected elder, taught the younger shapeshifters control, guiding them through the tempest of their transformations. Cain, a silent, formidable presence, became the valley's guardian, his vigilance a reassuring constant. Emily, with her cunning and wisdom, helped bridge the gap between their two worlds. But the past, like a persistent shadow, always lingered. The memory of the town, of the burning workshop, of Stan's betrayal, was a scar on Jonathan's soul, healed but still sensitive to the touch. One crisp autumn morning, a young shapeshifter arrived, breathless and terrified, having escaped a raid on a smaller satellite community near their old valley. The news was grim. Stan's hunters, still active, were growing bolder, their methods more brutal, and they were expanding their territory. A decision was made, not lightly. The hidden valley was safe, but the outside world was bleeding. Jonathan, Cain, and Emily, along with a small contingent of the valley's strongest shapeshifters and their human allies, decided it was time to return. To face the phantoms, to settle old scores, and to protect the innocent. The journey back was a strange blend of nostalgia and dread. As they approached the familiar landscape, Jonathan felt a knot of anticipation tighten in his stomach. The distant mountains, the winding river, the very scent of the pine forests. It was home, yet no longer his. They approached the town under the cover of a moonless night, moving like spectral figures through the familiar woods. Jonathan found himself looking for landmarks, for the old shortcuts, the familiar contours of the land. When they finally overlooked the town, Jonathan gasped. It had changed, dramatically. The sleepy, fear-ridden community he had fled was gone. In its place was a vibrant, thriving town. New storefronts gleamed, lights blazed from a revitalized downtown, and the streets, even at this late hour, were not entirely deserted. A sense of energy, of prosperity, hummed in the air. The unspoken fear that had once clung to the very bricks and mortar had vanished. "What happened?" Jonathan whispered, profound disorientation washing over him. Emily, her senses sharper, pointed. Look. Below them, on a hill overlooking the town, stood a new building, modern and imposing. It had a clean, almost militaristic design. As they watched, a patrol car, not the sheriff's usual sedan, but a sleek black vehicle, moved silently through the streets, its occupants scanning the shadows. They were not police. They were Stan's hunters. The old mafia, Jonathan learned from their reconnaissance, had been completely eradicated by Stan's group shortly after Jonathan and Cain fled. Stan had indeed cleaned up the valley, but not in the way Jonathan had hoped. He had replaced one evil with another. His organization, the Guardians of Order, as they now called themselves, had taken complete control. They had brought prosperity, yes, but at a terrible price. They were a paramilitary force, operating outside the law, ruling the town with an iron fist, under the guise of security. And their ultimate goal remained unchanged: the eradication of all supernatural beings. Jonathan's blood ran cold. He realized the terrifying truth. Stan had created a new world, a peaceful one on the surface, but built on the foundations of fear and absolute control. The townspeople, grateful for the stability and the absence of the old threats, had willingly traded their freedom for security, unknowingly embracing a far more insidious tyranny. This was not a world where humans and shapeshifters lived in harmony. It was a world where humans were docile sheep, protected by wolves who despised all who were different. "This is not peace," Jonathan growled, his amber eyes burning in the darkness. "This is a cage." Their new purpose was stark, clear. They could not let Stan continue. They could not allow this perversion of order to stand. Jonathan, Cain, and Emily, now veterans of countless battles, became the spearhead of a desperate resistance. They began to plan, to observe, to infiltrate. They learned the movements of Stan's patrols, the weaknesses of his command structure, the locations of his hidden outposts. They discovered Stan had established a training compound not far from the old shapeshifter lair, where he indoctrinated new recruits, teaching them not just to hunt, but to hate. He had become a prophet of fear, twisting logic, painting all shapeshifters as inherently evil, a threat to human existence. Jonathan and Cain decided to stay. This was their home, however twisted it had become. They had failed to protect it once. They would not fail again. They became the whisper in the night, the shadow in the corner of Stan's perfectly ordered world. They started disrupting his operations, sabotaging his equipment, freeing those he had imprisoned. They sent messages, subtle but chilling, letting Stan know that they had returned. Stan, arrogant in his power, scoffed at the initial reports. More feral beasts, he had said, dismissing them as isolated incidents. But as the disruptions grew more frequent, more audacious, he began to understand. A cold fury settled in his eyes. Jonathan and Cain knew this was just the beginning. Their history, their struggle, was far from over. A new terrifying battle loomed, not against wild beasts, but against the calculated cruelty of humanity itself. This time they fought not just for survival, but for freedom, for the soul of the valley. And they made sure Stan understood the true meaning of a legend returned. The crisp autumn air held a taste of impending doom. Jonathan stood with Cain and Emily on a ridge overlooking the valley, the full moon, a luminous disk in the clear night sky, casting long, eerie shadows below. Spread out before them was Stan's main compound, a fortress of steel and concrete, humming with a chilling artificial order. Lights blazed, patrols moved with robotic precision, and the air was thick with the scent of human ambition and fear. This was it, the final battle. Their allies, a motley crew of younger shapeshifters from the hidden valley, and a handful of disillusioned humans who had seen through Stan's facade, were arrayed behind them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy whose fanaticism was as sharp as their blades. Jonathan felt the weight of it all, the immense, terrifying responsibility. He knew they faced defeat. He felt the cold touch of fear, but it was overshadowed by a burning resolve. This was not just about their survival. It was about the freedom of this valley, about the future of a world where different beings could coexist. "Are you ready?" Jonathan asked Cain, his voice low, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. Cain simply nodded, his face a mask of grim determination, his body coiled, ready for the fray. He was a force of nature, a silent, deadly engine of destruction. Emily, her face pale but resolute, clutched a pair of wicked-looking daggers, her gaze fixed on the compound below. The attack was a calculated risk, a desperate, audacious gamble. They hit hard, striking multiple points simultaneously, using their shapeshifter agility and strength to punch through Stan's defenses. Chaos erupted. Alarms screamed, spotlights swept frantically across the compound, and the night was filled with the crackle of gunfire and the guttural roars of transforming shapeshifters. Jonathan, his own transformation complete, a powerful, amber-eyed blur of speed and strength, moved through the compound like a vengeful spirit, taking down Stan's elite guards with brutal efficiency. He felt the pure, exhilarating rush of his power, honed by years of training, unleashed in a controlled fury. He saw Cain, a dark, unstoppable whirlwind, tearing through the main gate, engaging multiple targets at once, his roars echoing across the battlefield. Emily, leading a small team, disabled the communications tower, isolating Stan's forces, plunging parts of the compound into darkness. The fighting was desperate, bloody. Jonathan watched as some of their allies fell, cut down by the relentless firepower of Stan's forces. He felt a surge of grief and rage, but he pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. This was a war, and sacrifices were being made. Then he saw Stan, the old hunter, no longer just a man, but clad in reinforced tactical armor, wielding a heavy rifle, his eyes burning with fanaticism. He was directing his forces, a cold, calculating general in a war of extermination. Stan's gaze met Jonathan's across the battlefield, and a grim smile spread across his face. He recognized Jonathan, and in his eyes, there was only hatred. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the side of the compound. Cain, in a desperate move, had detonated a hidden fuel depot, creating a diversion, buying them precious seconds. But the blast exposed him. Stan, seeing his opportunity, raised his rifle. Cain, number Jonathan, roared, seeing the imminent danger, feeling a cold dread clutch his heart. But it was too late. Stan fired, a heavy round slamming into Cain's chest. The impact threw Cain backward, sending him sprawling against a concrete barrier. He roared, a sound of agony and defiance, trying to push himself up, but his movements were sluggish. Stan fired again and again, mercilessly, targeting the same spot. Jonathan felt a scream tear from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. He watched, horrified, as Cain faltered, his amber eyes dimming, the powerful form collapsing. He rushed forward, a blur of motion, tearing through Stan's remaining guards, his fury unleashed. He reached Cain just as the monstrous man-beast dissolved, shrinking, reverting to his human form, his lean, scarred body crumpled and broken. Cain coughed, a terrible rattling sound, blood blooming across his chest. His eyes, now a dull, milky gray, met Jonathan's. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You survive," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then his breath hitched, and his eyes, once so fiercely alive, went still. Cain was gone. Jonathan felt it then. The true, absolute, horrifying loss. The pain was a physical blow, a burning agony that ripped through his soul, tearing away every last vestige of his humanity. Grief, pure and unbridled, consumed him. Rage, raw and incandescent, surged through his veins, transforming him utterly. He screamed, a sound that was no longer human, a primal roar of pain and vengeance that shook the very foundations of the compound. His transformation completed, not just a partial shift, but a full, terrifying metamorphosis. His body rippled, growing larger, denser, his fur darkening to a midnight black, his claws elongating into wicked blades. His teeth, now razor-sharp fangs, tore at his lips, and his eyes, no longer merely amber, burned with a furious, incandescent golden light, a reflection of the sun, of a dying star. He was a true shapeshifter, a beast of nightmare, utterly consumed by vengeance. He turned, his eyes fixed on Stan, who stood frozen, his face finally showing a flicker of fear. "You killed him," Jonathan snarled, his voice a distorted, guttural rumble. "You took him from me." He launched himself at Stan, a black streak of fury. Stan fired, but the bullets simply tore through Jonathan's rapidly healing flesh, barely slowing him. Jonathan was a force of unstoppable nature, fueled by pure, absolute rage. He tore Stan's weapon from his grasp, snapped it like a twig, and then with a primal roar, he attacked. He ripped, he shredded, he clawed, unleashing all the horror and savagery that Cain had taught him to control. Stan's screams were cut short, lost in the maelstrom of Jonathan's vengeance. The remaining hunters scattered, terrified, their formations breaking, their training useless against the unleashed fury of the monstrous shapeshifter. Jonathan pursued them, a vengeful demon, hunting them down without mercy, a grim promise of retribution for Cain's death. The battle ended not with a victory, but with a massacre, a terrifying display of raw, untamed power. As dawn approached, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and bruised purple, Jonathan stood amidst the carnage, the shattered remains of Stan's compound, his monstrous form slowly, reluctantly, reverting to human. He was covered in blood, not all of it his own, his body aching, but his soul was a desolate wasteland. Cain was dead, his friend, his mentor, his family. He stood over Cain's still body, the quiet dawn broken only by the whimpers of the wounded and the distant crackle of dying fires. He felt an emptiness so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. But within that emptiness, a new purpose hardened. He did not just survive. He avenged. He turned, his eyes still burning with that fierce golden light, now tinged with a cold, terrifying resolve. He had destroyed Stan's empire, but the war was not over. It had only just begun. Jonathan Merrick, the grieving shapeshifter, swore a solemn oath over Cain's body. He hunted those who had taken his friend from him. He became a legend, a terrifying whisper in the darkness, a protector of the weak, a relentless hunter of those who dared to prey on others. His path, now solitary, was clear. Years passed. The scars of the final battle healed, but the wounds on Jonathan's soul never truly closed. He had roamed, a lone wolf, driven by the echoes of Cain's memory and the burning ember of vengeance in his heart. He hunted down the remnants of Stan's organization, dismantling their cells, freeing their captives, his methods often brutal, always effective. He became the whisper, the legend, the force of retribution that stalked the shadows, a protector forged in grief and rage. Then, One quiet morning, a decade after Cain's death, Jonathan found himself drawn back, inexorably, to the valley that had once been his home. He approached it cautiously, under the cloak of a soft, misty rain, his senses alert, his amber eyes scanning for threats. What he saw defied his expectations, defied the very landscape of his grief. The town, which he had left in chaos, now thrived with a profound, vibrant peace. Stan's compound lay in ruins, reclaimed by nature, a testament to a forgotten war. In its place, on the very hill where Cain had fallen, stood a simple, elegant monument, a towering oak tree. Its branches reached skyward, its trunk carved with intricate, swirling patterns that hummed with an ancient energy. At its base, a single, smooth stone bore no name, but Jonathan knew. It was Cain's memorial, a silent tribute to the quiet protector. The town itself was transformed. Humans and shapeshifters now walked openly, side by side, their differences accepted, even celebrated. The Hidden Valley's philosophy had spread, its gentle teachings fostering a true coexistence. Children, both human and shapeshifter, played in the park, their laughter echoing through the air. Jonathan saw familiar faces, now aged, their eyes holding a newfound wisdom, a shared understanding. Emily, her face now bearing the serene lines of leadership, greeted him at the edge of town, her eyes filled with welcome and profound understanding. "The war ended," she said softly, "because you finished it. Because Cain showed us the way. We remembered his lessons. And yours." Jonathan walked through the town, a quiet observer. He saw the new world that had blossomed from the ashes of his personal tragedy. It was not a world of absolute order, but one of evolving harmony, built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. The old mafia was gone, truly gone, its insidious influence wiped away by Stan's brutal efficiency, which had, in a strange twist of fate, cleared the ground for something better. Stan's regime had fallen, leaving a vacuum that had been filled not by more hatred but by hope. He found the old workshop, or what was left of it. Just a concrete slab, overgrown with weeds, a phantom of a life he once lived. He sat on a fallen beam, remembering the smell of oil, the rhythmic clang of tools, the quiet camaraderie with Cain. He felt the phantom weight of the shotgun in his hands, the burning rage that had consumed him. But now, as he looked at the vibrant town, at the children playing, at the silent monument to his lost friend, the desire for vengeance, which had fueled him for so long, finally, mercifully, began to recede. He realized that peace was not found in endless retribution, but in forgiveness, in rebuilding, in protecting what was good. He avenged Cain, yes, but more importantly, he honored his legacy by helping to create a world where such sacrifices were less necessary. Jonathan, finally, found his own peace. He joined Emily, becoming a mentor to the new generation of shapeshifters, teaching them control, responsibility, and the delicate balance of their existence. He shared his stories, not just of battles and monsters, but of hope, of friendship, of the fragile beauty of a world where darkness and light sometimes found a way to coexist. He spoke of Cain not as a monster, but as a guardian, a silent force of nature who had paid the ultimate price for a better world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the western peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues, Jonathan stood before a polished mirror in his small, new home. His face was lined, his hair fully gray, his body carrying the subtle marks of a life lived hard and fiercely. He looked into his own eyes, and there, deep within their depths, The familiar amber glow still pulsed. A steady, warm light. No longer a symbol of terror or rage, but a quiet reminder of his past, of his journey, of the monster he had become, and the man he had chosen to be. He had found his place in this new world. He was not just a shapeshifter. He was a guardian, a teacher, a bridge between worlds. He was a legend, not because of the battles he had fought, but because of the peace he had helped forge. The amber gaze, once a mark of his curse, was now a beacon of his enduring hope. And in the quiet hum of the valley, Jonathan knew his story, and the world it helped create continued.